Good morning and welcome to Daylight Church Online. We're just so thankful that you're joining us this morning and hope that you have a great experience. We want to let you know that if you'll go to mydaylightchurch.com, there's a card there that says Online Church. And on the Online Church card, it'll tell you everything you need to know about being a part of our online church community, how you can get involved in small groups, how you can give financially, how you can be involved in the service projects that we do. So even if you're in Kansas or Cambodia, you can sure join us and be a part of our church. We'd like you to check it out there and introduce yourself. So go to mydaylightchurch.com and check out the online church card. Thanks.
A couple of reasons why I wanted to show that clip. One, it's just awesome. It's one of the greatest introductions to any character in a movie that I've ever seen. For those of you that may be watching online, we just watched the clip from the Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one. And this is the intro to Captain Jack Sparrow. And in this, I love this clip because it shows everything you need to know about this character. And you get to see everything that kind of makes Captain Jack who he is, but it plays on the audience's expectations and the audience's judgment. When we first see this clip coming in, you see Captain Jack on top of a ship, and I love the way that the camera swoops up from underneath, and you just expect him to, this is the first time you're seeing him, so you expect there to be this big crew that's underneath him. He's on this giant ship, and he's overlooking the sea, and you can just feel like he's hearing his own theme music in his head. Like the music, the score that you're hearing is what's really going on in his head as he's looking out over the ocean. Only for you to see him look down, and as he comes down the rope, and you see that the ship that he's in is actually a tiny little boat, and it's sinking. And this is something that I wanted us to think about, is this sinking ship of judgment. That this is our judgment. We ascribe all this stuff to Jack when we see him in the beginning of this film, that we have all these expectations of who he is and what he's about, only for that to be completely subverted. And then by the time that you see him coming into the dock, he just steps right off of a completely sunken ship. And so this idea of, I want to talk about judgment and the different types of judgment that we deal with as the church, and how this impacts our life, and ultimately how we can sometimes see ourselves as Captain Jack in this scenario, where we're looking out and seeing the world and seeing ourselves as above everything else, when in reality our ship is sinking. So judgment is everywhere in our lives. It can fuel how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive others. It informs who we choose to spend our time with, our social cliques, climbing the corporate ladder, etc. And by its very nature, it puts us at the center of our universe. We can have these perceptions of ourselves based on the way we were raised, in the communities that we grow up in the people we choose to spend our time with, what we saw on various media, TV, whatever, growing up, values that are instilled in us that give us these expectations of what our life is supposed to be like and how we treat other people. Recently, in the last couple of years, I've gotten really into barbecue. I'm really proud of this. Is some ribs that I made a couple months ago. And they say that guys in general, whenever you get in your 30s and 40s, like I've seen it said that guys when you get in your 30s and 40s, you have two hobbies to choose from. One is smoking meat. The other one is World War II history. And I feel like this is just me to a T. I've definitely gotten in more into the smoking meats category. And as I was learning and really trying to get better at this, and making the best brisket possible, and the various things, I found myself really going down the rabbit hole, learning and thinking there of all of these different styles of barbecue. And I used to live in Kansas City, and so the style of barbecue there is very different from other parts of the country. And so I'm going to talk about barbecue for a really long time in this sermon. I just want to give you a heads up, mostly because, one, I'm hungry, and two, this is just so great. But one of the as I'm learning about barbecue, I get really into some of these different barbecue places in Texas and whatnot. And I was watching this video on YouTube, some of these barbecue YouTubers. Yes, that's a thing. And I'm really just laying out all my hobbies out in front of you. But these barbecue YouTubers that are from Texas and some of the best pit masters in Texas recently went to Kansas City and took their big trailer with their pit on it, and they set up shop in the middle of this parking lot, giving away free Texas-style barbecue brisket, and set up a table that said, "Texas barbecue is the best barbecue, changed my mind." And so they go up to this this group in Kansas City. And I lived in Kansas City, and the pride that people feel about their barbecue in Kansas City is just a level that you've never seen. I mean, people really, really love what they have there, and no one is going to change their mind. So I just thought it was so funny that these guys are going up here to do this. And so they make all of this free food. People are coming from all over the city to come check it out. And at the end of it, they say, so, what did you think of it? And these are some of the responses. This is flavorless. If you know anything about Texas-style barbecue, Texas-style doesn't have any, they usually do like minimal seasonings, just like salt and pepper and smoke. It's all about technique. They don't really do a whole lot of sauce. I mean, it's a thing, but it's not a featured thing. And so flavorless, where's the sauce? Are you sure you seasoned the meat? And then like the one that just felt decimating to me was sorry, it's just not my thing, but thanks anyway. You got free food. And it's like, no, I don't think I'm good. And I was thinking about this because these guys were just so caught off guard that people were not going to like what they did and that their method of doing things. And because in their world, their style of how they do this is like they're the best in the world. They can see themselves as top dog, and they show up in this place saying, barbecue is bad in Kansas City and you're all losers, change my mind. And it comes from this place of feeling like you know the rules and the way to do things, placing yourself as for them, it was placing themselves as kind of the judge of what's good and what's not good, and then going into a place that's completely unfamiliar with that expectation and really showing themselves to be judgmental and seeing people just completely reject it. And I would argue that a lot of times us in the church that, and this isn't just for church folks, but this is for everyone, that we all kind of deal with this same kind of mentality that says, we've learned this certain way and we've gone down the rabbit hole of this values or whatnot, and so we see ourselves as being better than others. And a lot of that, I want to talk about just judgment and where that kind of stems from. And I want to talk a little bit about the Garden of Eden. So in the story in Genesis and in the Garden of Eden, you see God establish a relationship with Adam and Eve. He's walking with them daily in the garden. And this was his intention of having this relationship that was, it talks about how they were naked and unashamed, that there was no shame, there was no judgment, there were no flaws. It was perfect, living in unity and harmony with God and man dwelling together in the garden. And there was one stipulation, which was you can eat, God told Adam and Eve, you can eat of every fruit that's growing in the garden, except for this one, that was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And as you know in the story, the serpent tempts Eve. She eats from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and gives it off to Adam, and then right here at that moment when they ate the fruit of the tree, their eyes were opened, and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. And when the cool evening breezes were blowing, Adam and his wife heard the Lord God walking about in the garden. So they hid from the Lord God among the trees. And then the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" He replied, "I heard you walking in the garden, so I hid. I was afraid because I was naked." "Well, who told you you were naked?" the Lord God asked. "Have you eaten from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat?" And a lot of times when we look at this passage and we think about that the original sin was disobedience, that there was a disregard for what God said, and that this disobedience is what caused the separation of humanity and God. And I would argue that that's not what's happening here. I think what happened in this moment was that Adam and Eve developed this knowledge of what is right and what is wrong, and immediately they feel shame. And what happens is in this moment, they, because of their knowledge of good and evil, it's now placed them as the judge, and it's placed them in the center kind of their universe, and kind of removes God from being, in their view, removes God from being the judge, the arbiter of truth, or whatnot, and places them now in this role that's ultimately God's. Dr. Greg Boyd says in his book, Repenting of Religion, it says, "We have failed to understand and internalize the biblical teaching that our fundamental sin is not our evil, as though the solution for sin was to become good, but our getting life from what we believe is our knowledge of good and evil. Our fundamental sin is that we place ourselves in the position of God and divide the world between what we judge to be good and what we judge to be evil. And this judgment is the primary thing that keeps us from doing the central thing that God created and saved us to do, namely, love like he loves." And I see this as something that we struggle with. And this happens with everyone. With going down for me, with going back to barbecue for a second, going down the rabbit hole is like when I learned a little bit about it, and now all of a sudden I'm critiquing everybody else's stuff. And it's like there's a great sermon that H preached years ago that was it was something along the lines of descending Mount Stupid. And I don't know if you've ever seen this chart, and I don't know why I don't have it as a slide, but there's a chart that the y-axis says it's a line graph, and the y-axis says your willingness to give an opinion on a subject, and the x-axis is the knowledge that you have on a subject. And you see this line where it's like as soon as they learn a little bit, their willingness to give an opinion on it just skyrockets. And then the more they learn, they come back down. And then as they continue to learn, eventually, once they're really knowledgeable on the subject, then they'll be more willing to give an opinion. But that first little blip, H likes to call Mount Stupid. And this idea of being on Mount Stupid is what happens with us when we start to, it goes into all different aspects of our life where we've read, our Bible a little bit and kind of gained a revelation on maybe some different passages, and now all of a sudden we have an opinion and we can judge others based on what we have found to be right and true. Or in my case with barbecue or whatever, it's like, oh, I learned a little bit, and now all of a sudden I want to critique others on this thing that I know nothing about. In the case of the guys from Texas, they had this opinion of, well, I've been doing it this way, and I just assume everyone thinks that I'm the best, and seeing themselves kind of as the center of their universe and their judge. And the thing I want to talk about too with this, that I just want to touch on is this person, the change my mind, and we've seen that this kind of is like a meme that's kind of gone on to have all sorts of different, this picture has gone to have all sorts of different arguments people will post and say, I have whatever opinion and then change my mind. But when you look at that picture, you kind of see the posture of the guy in the chair, and then the idea of like, this is what I think, change my mind. And maybe to their perspective, it's inviting someone to come in and have an argument. But as we look at it, it's like we already know that there's no convincing this kind of person. Like they've already been judge, jury, and sentencer in their mind. And so that happens to all of us. And going back to the garden, right after this passage with Adam and Eve, one of the coolest things about it is there's the verse that says that right after this one actually, that God immediately when there's the separation between humanity and God gives them clothes. He helps make them clothes and gives them shoes. And God is willing to set aside this idea that we could be our own judge. He's willing to set aside that to make sure that we're accommodated and because of love. He desires that relationship and that love with us. God temporarily accommodates humanity's need to judge itself by establishing the law through Moses. So later on through history, we have to be able to judge ourselves. We have to have something absolute to hold ourselves to, these standards to hold ourselves and others to, because we can't just imagine living just in relationship with God. And so God accommodates this by giving us the law and giving us all these standards that is really hard for us to be able to live up to. The law served as a reminder that no one is perfect but God, and yet still society stratifies and divides itself by how many were adhering to the law. So you had, in Jesus' day, you had different factions of the Jews, where you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Sadducees being more of a priesthood, and the Pharisees you saw more like rabbinical, the way kind of their hierarchy, and it was all kind of based on how they adhered to this law, to the Torah. And God is willing to accommodate and work with this, but ultimately that's not what He wants. There needs to be a fulfillment. There needs to be a restoration of what was happening in the garden, right? That unity and walking with each other and being in relationship and not worrying so much about these standards that you have to hold yourself to, or the shame, to be naked and unafraid. And then Jesus comes on the scene, and this is where God is setting his plan into motion. And Jesus says in Matthew 5, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Because when in Jesus, God is establishing a kingdom and a new way of bringing back that garden state to a degree where it's all about this relationship. He wants to establish that relationship with us. And Jesus touches on this so many times. But I want to read from Romans, where the Apostle Paul says, "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. For sin indeed was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sinning was not like the transgression of Adam, who was a type of one that was to come. But the free gift is not like the trespass. For if many died through one's trespass, much more have the grace of God and the free gift by the grace of God of that one man, Jesus Christ, abounded for many. And the free gift is not like the result of that one man's sin. For the judgment following one trespass brought condemnation," talking about the separation of God and humanity, coming from this initial place of judgment and feeling shame. "But the free gift following many trespasses brought justification. For if because of one man's trespass, death reigned through that one man, much more will those who receive the abundance of grace and the free gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ." That Jesus comes to establish this new life and new relationship with God. And it gets us away from this initial feeling that we have to be the judge, right? That we have to have these standards to hold ourselves to, and the standards to hold ourselves or to hold others to. And it kind of removes us from the situation, puts God back in the center of our universe, and getting back into the God being being the judge. And it's interesting to think about it, because when we think about judgment and when we think about if God only knew these parts of me, he would crack down on me. That's us judging ourselves. That has nothing to do with how God sees us or views us. God's wanting to get back to this garden state. In each and every one of us, we have an inner person, like an inner monologue that is kind of always going. As we're going about our day, we're kind of hearing ourselves talking in our head, processing information, and talking to ourselves, and this kind of inner voice that's always kind of going, a lot of times is built around us kind of being the judge of ourselves and our world, and we can tend to judge ourselves. So I want to talk about a couple ways. Like one, we can judge ourselves. Two, we can really judge others. But how judgment in our life manifests on ourselves is we can feel shame, like Adam and Eve did. Anxiety, condemnation, depression, guilt, anger, body dysmorphia, attention-seeking behavior, and eating disorders are some of the ways that we can fall victim to our own inner judge. And this was kind of the start of the fall of humanity, was putting ourselves kind of in the center and making ourselves the judge, that we hold ourselves to our incredibly high standards. And they can manifest in all these sorts of ways. And then I think about that this also kind of manifests in how we treat others, because we have these standards, and sometimes it gets into self-loathing and whatnot, and then it can kind of overflow into how we treat other people, whether it be with rage or maybe seeing someone else that's different from you and being kind of spiteful towards that person, or seeing someone that you may just disagree with how they do things, and therefore you kind of tend to avoid them, or you don't want to necessarily spend time in talking with them. You'd rather just let them be, and you go off on your own way. These things get bigger and bigger, where now we live in a very polarized society where there's all sorts of opinions on everything. I mean, if you just look on social media, someone could just post like, "Hey, I really like my dog," and then someone might comment and say, "Well, I really can't stand your dog because dogs all in general are bad, because I was once, had a bad experience with a dog. Therefore, I don't like you or your dog. Have a nice day." And you see this kind of stuff happening all the time, where we immediately, because we're seeing ourselves as the judge, and we immediately put all of our expectations on everyone else, because by seeing ourselves as the judge, we're the center of our universe, and it doesn't come across as loving, and we see people as less than or other than, and it really gets in the way of what God's trying to do. And Jesus wants to call us out of that. As followers of Jesus, we are not called to judge, but to love. And this little graphic with the vine, so this is in John chapter 15 through 17, which I just think those three chapters are just some of the best. Like if you're just looking for a place to, you don't really know where you want to read in the Bible, just start off at John 15 and just go from there. It's some of the best. It's some of my favorite stuff that I read that Jesus says. And this image is talking about where he says, "Abide in me. I'm the vine, you are the branches," and having this place of contentment in Christ. And Jesus says, "Judge not, that you be not judged." And this is in Matthew chapter 5, where he's saying this. "Judge not, that you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but you do not notice the log that is in your own eye?" And when we read this passage, we think a lot about, like, well, yeah, why do you want to come against someone when you got your own mess and issues to deal with? And that's not actually kind of the spirit. The way I see it, it's not necessarily the spirit of the passage. Is God is saying the person that has the speck in their eye has immeasurable worth to God, and you also have immeasurable worth to God. And and though you may want to criticize when you have your own issues, it's still that you're still fully loved and valued in relationship with God above all of that. Because when we read this, sometimes we're like, well, maybe I shouldn't judge others because I really have to judge myself. But it's beyond that. It's getting back to the way things were in the garden and having a relationship with God. As Jesus says in Matthew 7, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. When we're looking at these kind of, this passage is helping us overcome judgment. And Jesus calls us to a new place of because he said prior that he's here to fulfill the law, but he's giving a new commandment that we would love one another. He says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. And it's a new commandment that he gives because he's trying to establish this relationship, again, that gets us above the judgment and gets us back to loving each other and seeing ourselves in his love. One of the coolest things is something that I just want us to really think about is that right here at the start of this passage, it says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. That God loves you in the same way that God loves himself. That the glue of the Trinity, this love that God feels for himself has been given out to us, and that he sees you with unbelievable, immeasurable worth. And then you're called to extend that same love without judgment, without reservation to others. And this is the thing that we'll be known for. All people will know that we are disciples of Jesus because of our love for one another. And it's not about us having the right opinions. It's not about us going to church on Sunday or reading our Bible or our prayer life or our walk. While those things can be important and can have value, the most important thing, the foundational aspect of what makes us followers of Jesus is the love that we have of others. It's the idea of getting ourselves out of the place of being the judge. We don't have to be the judge anymore. God is the judge. And with that, it has all these different implications. One of the things that, so I want to kind of go back to this guy. This person's feeling really down about themselves and how they have these expectations and they're just not hitting them, or they feel like maybe they've let other people down. It's the same with Adam in the garden, realizing he's naked and feeling like he's going to feel this judgment, and was afraid. And when we get back to this guy and see what they're dealing with, I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Peter Attia, who is a health and wellness. He kind of specializes in health and wellness and longevity, and he was in an interview, and they were saying he was talking about emotional health, and he was talking about the rage that he was feeling for his life. For the first 45 years of his life, as long as he could remember, he dealt with just extreme rage. Felt like he would have these, and he felt like it was because he had really high standards for himself, and when he wouldn't hit it, he'd be like, "Oh man, you're just the worst. You're just awful at this. You're never going to get any better." And it was dealing with a bunch of this self-hatred and loathing, and it spilled out into how he treated other people. Right? He'd be really angry if other people didn't meet his expectations, or if he really hated himself, he would lash out against other people. And one of the things that he talked about that really worked with him, and it just ties into this so beautifully, is he was using the example of when he was shooting, playing archery, and he was trying to hit the mark, and And what he was used to happening is if he would just barely miss the mark, he'd be like, you idiot, what are you doing? And then try it again. Why are you so bad at this? And instead, he got a recommendation from his therapist at the time that said, every time that you miss the mark with your archery, or that you don't live up to the standards or say you don't meet some expectation that you had for yourself, that instead of your inner judge, your inner monologue, coming down really hard on you, that instead think about it as if it was your friend. That if you're standing next to your friend and they shot the arrow and barely missed the mark, it changes, right? It changes how you view it. So, and his therapist told him to record it, and to record himself talking out loud, encouraging himself as if he was talking to his best friend, and to play that back, and so because if we were with our friend and they didn't hit their expectation, what are the things that we're going to say? Like, it's okay. Like, you got this. Yeah, you got a lot on your mind. The wind is kind of blowing, so it kind of maybe affected your shot a little bit. We do all these little things to, like, you got this. It's going to be good. Don't worry. Like, you'll get it next time. And for him, he saw this really help with his inner rage. And that voice slowly got quieter and quieter, the voice that was lashing out and making him hate himself, and eventually was replaced with this voice of encouragement. And I think about that illustration, and it's that supporting yourself as you were talking to a friend, but imagine how much more that God feels about you. When you're in those moments and you don't live up to your expectation, that is not just a, hey, buddy, you got this. You'll get it next time. Or, or making excuses or whatever. It's God within us saying, like, you're amazing. Like, you are so incredible. You have so much worth. Like, maybe you didn't hit your expectation, but guess what? You met all of mine, and exceeded them. And that this God within us is helping our inner judge, because we don't have to be the center of our universe anymore. That now God is within us, screaming out with love for us. And then that spills over, just like with the rage illustration from Peter Attia, that now that love that is within us, and that inner voice that's encouraging, is now spilling over into our relationships with others and with people that maybe normally, if they didn't meet whatever our standards or expectations are, that now, like, we see nothing but love for them because of the immeasurable worth that we feel like God has for us, and then that gets placed onto other people. And so I want to encourage you today to, in those moments, to think about your inner voice, and try that exercise of really talking out loud and encouraging yourself, and removing yourself as the judge in your own life. This gets into even how, like, churches operate. We've talked before here at Daylight about different types of theologies. There's bounded set theology, which means you kind of build this, like, everyone who is within the boundary is a follower of Jesus, or is considered righteous and whatnot. And then there's people that are outside of it because they haven't met whatever the standard is. But then there's the centered set theology that places God in the center. And the thing is that you want to make sure that it's just important that people are just heading in the right direction. And I don't think either one of these are really perfect theology or anything like that. And we've talked about it before. And if you're interested in learning more about these different theologies, you can look back through some of the past sermons that H has talked about it. But this idea that when we draw this boundary around where we are, it's coming from that place of us being the judge, holding some of these absolute truths to kind of be, and us being kind of the arbiter of whatever the truth is. And then in this other illustration, and we have God in the center, you could be all the way out in left field, but if you're heading in the right direction, that's what matters, is that you see the worth in people, and you want to make sure and encourage them to grow in their relationship with Jesus as they head towards the center. Because you could be right next to the center, but facing the complete, you might do all the right acts, you might have all the right things, but maybe you don't have love for your neighbor. Maybe you're seeing yourself as your own judge, and you're kind of you're heading away from God to a degree. And these kinds of things get played up into how we approach church. Another thing I want to encourage you with is to people watch. So I talked about the kind of inner monologue that you have. That's how you perceive yourself. Well, when you start just looking around at the people in your day-to-day, or I just want to encourage you, even if you're at a park or whatnot, just think about like look around and see the people. Every person has immeasurable worth to God. And that love that God has for you is that same love that we should be feeling towards our neighbors. We want to see people the way God sees them, made in his image, with this immeasurable worth. The same love that God has for himself is the same love that he has for us. And as his church, we participate in his love by loving others regardless of our differences, past history, or the fear of how we'd be perceived. That this is our goal. This is what the world will know us by, is by our love. And removing ourselves from being the judge. That this idea that started in the Garden of Eden, where we deal with this, we feel like we gain life from having this knowledge of what's right and what's wrong. It removes us from that and puts that responsibility back on Jesus where it should be. And our goal is to point people to Jesus and love them unconditionally. That this is what the world will know us by, is our love. And so I want to encourage you with those two things. I just want to reiterate, is when you're judging yourself, that inner judge within you, encourage yourself. See yourself the way that God sees you. That the way that he loves himself is the way that he loves you. And then to people watch, to see that people are filled with that they're all worthy of God, no matter how you may feel about them or how you may, the way you feel about them should reflect the way that God feels about them, even if it's people that it can be hard to be around or and whatnot.